Morning, everybody. My name is Louise Donlan. I'm the chairperson of Culture Ireland, and I'm delighted to be here this morning in this very fine setting to celebrate the richness of Irish writing. The British Library has asked me to welcome you to the first session here today. So if I could just tell you a little bit about Culture Ireland. It was set up in 2005 to operate as a bridge for Irish arts and culture to be presented across the world, and it's under the remit of the Government Department for Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media. We may be a nation of writers, but we struggle sometimes with our departmental names. We provide grants which support artists presenting work to strategic festivals and venues across the globe, and it allows them to present their work basically across the globe and across the world, secure work abroad. And the impact is really significant. In 2023 alone, over 5,000 artists were supported through €6.3 million of grant aid, and basically cultivating a far-reaching appreciation of Irish culture and broadening the global footprint for Irish arts and culture. And I think it's fair to say that Irish artists punch well above their weight across all disciplines throughout the world, across stage, screen, and particularly our Irish writers. And it's fantastic to be here today and this weekend, indeed, to celebrate their work. So Culture Ireland is very pleased to support this. And we thank the British Library, and in particular, John Fawcett, for all his work. So the first session today is Small Town, Big Stories, with Cauvery Madhavan, Chloe Michelle Howarth, and Donal Ryan in conversation with Caoilinn Hughes. So please welcome our panel to the stage.
Can you hear me okay? Great, wonderful. Welcome, it's the morning. This is not my best time, but I will try my best. It's a fabulous, fabulous weekend, and I'm so delighted that this is its second year. Long may it continue. I hope that you all stick around for the day, and it's horrible outside, so this is a much nicer place to be. I'm Caoilinn Hughes, and I think it's wonderful to be part of this Irish Writers' Weekend, very meaningfully held at the British Library. I think it's thanks to the interest and the expertise and the enthusiasm of John Fawcett, who's head of the events here at the library, that this festival has come together and is here for a second year and looks to be here for years to come. Just his knowledge and passion for Irish literature in our email exchanges and in speaking in person has been so clear. He really has been reading very, very voraciously and with so much energy and enthusiasm. So this is partly a result of that, and of course with thanks to Culture Ireland for the support too. So for the following hour and change, we'll be talking about small towns and big ideas. And we've brought together some big talent from small towns to chat about their books, and which I think are both portraits of communities of small towns, as well as chronicles of the lives of small town inhabitants. So we'll their first loves, their conflicts, their betrayals, their friendships, losses, key discoveries they make in their lives. The three books have so much in common, despite being, I think, very different structurally, and in terms of demographic and voice, and even the time period that they're set in. So it should be rich terrain. I'm going to quickly introduce the authors and then get into some questions, and then there'll be a good bit of time at the end for audience questions, so please fill in the gaps that I'll inevitably leave. I'm going to go in alphabetical order to introduce the authors. We've got Chloe Michelle Howarth, who was born in July 1996. The July thing must be relevant for being a Leo, I guess. I don't know. It's interesting to have that there. Wikipedia will get your age right. Yeah. If you don't give the month, then they say that you're a year older from January 1st on. It's very depressing. She grew up in West Cork in the countryside, which has served as an inspiration for her writing in this beautiful novel, Sunburn. It's a queer coming-of-age story, and it was shortlisted for the 2024 Polari First Book Prize, the 2024 Book of the Year Discover Award at the British Book Awards, and the 2023 Nero Book Award for debut fiction. Chloe lives in Brighton. Then we have Cauvery Madhavan, who was born in India and moved to Ireland 39 years ago. Her books, Paddy Indian and The Uncoupling, were published to critical acclaim. Her novel, The Tainted, was one of Sebastian Barry's laureate picks when he was during his laureateship, as well as being on post Irish Book Awards top summer reads. The Inheritance is her latest novel, and it's garnered huge praise since its publication. Cauvery is a keen golfer and cook and lives with her husband in County Kildare. Finally, Donal Ryan from County Tipperary is the author of 6 best-selling novels and a short story collection. He's won a shed load of awards, including the European Prize for Literature, the Guardian First Book Award, 4 Irish Book Awards, not to mention shortlistings, except for the Booker. He was nominated for his first novel, The Spinning Heart, and again for his 4th novel, From a Low and Quiet Sea. His work has been adapted for stage and screen and translated into over 20 languages. He was a law graduate and former civil servant, and now teaches at UL, at the University of Limerick, and lives in Castleroy with his wife and their 2 children. So we're going to talk about Heart Be at Peace, which is his 7th novel. Now, that's out of the way. I'm going to ask Cauvery the first question, because I'm thinking historically the Cauvery's novel is set farthest back, and then we'll come forward towards the present day. The Inheritance is set in your locale in West Cork. It's set largely in 1986, and then in the same locale, but 400 years prior. So that's a really fascinating and fresh and daring, very scary choice to make. I'd love to hear a little bit about the story of The Inheritance. Who are its protagonists and what was its genesis?
Okay, thank you, Caoilinn. The genesis of the book, well, I actually came across the seed of the story nearly 24 years ago. When I overheard a conversation about a family that had a child on a bus that was traveling on a bus from the tip of the peninsula, the Beara Peninsula, to Cork City every day, just to give the family a bit of respite because the child had some kind of disability. I actually don't even know, it was something I just overheard at a kitchen table. And that stayed with me all these years, and I kind of parked it in my brain thinking I might write a short story out of it. And then I stewed on it for so many years that it kind of evolved into a book, into a novel idea, into an idea for a novel. And then with the story in the past, because we actually have a home in Glengariff and have had one for so many years, I was really well aware of the story of O'Sullivan Beara and the Long March, and how he hid in the forest with his kinspeople.
Maybe really, really briefly, if you're able to, some people in the audience might not know about that history. If you're able to maybe explain what the march was. Yeah,
so in 1601, O'Sullivan Beara was holed up in Glengariff Forest with his kinspeople, and when overnight on the 31st of December, 1601, his entire cattle, the clan's cattle, was killed in one fell swoop on one night. And overnight, he realized that that they had no choice but to move on. They had been hiding in the forest for 6 months at that stage from the English. They were literally the last ones to hold out. He was one of the last chiefs to hold out. And when that happened, within a few hours, he made the decision to march to Leitrim. Can you imagine in the middle of one of the, it was recorded as one of the harshest winters Ireland had ever seen. And that's exactly what they did. They just up sticks and left that night. And they marched, all the way to Leitrim, nearly 400 kilometers. And they did that in 16 days. Roughly 1,300 or 1,400 people went on the march. He left behind just the very sick, the elderly, and the very young, people who were wounded and couldn't move. And of the 1,300 that left, only 16 arrived alive. Yeah. So that march that route actually is now called the Beara-Breffni Way. It's one of the longest waymarked routes in Europe. You can actually hike the whole way. And it's a spectacular walk.
Wow. Yeah. And it's such a poignant story also because as far as I understand it, it was the Irish killing the Irish.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons it's not really well known as well, because it wasn't something that bards could sing about, because there was nothing heroic about having been killed by your own. And at the same time, you couldn't blame anybody along the way, because the English had said that if you supported them, but if you didn't actively engage in stopping them, you lose your own lands, your own people will be killed, your own cattle will be, slaughtered, your own lands, your own crops would be burnt. So people really didn't have a choice, and it was Irish on Irish, and because it was such a matter of shame, I think that's the reason why it's so little known.
Yeah, it's a divide and conquer strategy.
Yeah.
And I think the divide and conquer thing is really central to a lot of this small town. And a lot of the themes of these novels, in fact, from the drugs to social ostracization. It's a tragic story. But one last thing on the setting before I'll ask you to do a reading. Glengariff is where it's set, and I think where you've lived. And you were writing the story in a cottage that is central to the story in the novel. To tell us about that serendipity and what you were drawing on there.
Yeah, so I mean, I set the inheritance that this young man gets. The cottage is actually our own house in Glengariff. And it was only when I was about maybe 2.5, 3 chapters in that I found out by accident, looking at some state papers from the Elizabethan state papers, that the ridge on which our cottage is set actually is a ridge that 400 years ago, overlooked the whole action. So on one side of the ridge in a townland called Youngfield was where the English were camped, and on the other side of the ridge in the Glengariff forest was where O'Sullivan Beara was camped. And that just spurred me on. I just thought, I am meant to write the story, to think that I'm in the house on the very spot that somebody might have stood there and actually seen what was happening or known what was happening. They were only separated by 4 miles, but the forest was so dense in those days that literally even those 4 miles kept them hidden.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd love if you do a reading.
Okay. Caoilinn, I'm going to read from literally the first page. Okay. So. Sorry. Glengariff, Ireland, April 1986. It all began the day he found out his sister was his mother. As the minibus hiccuped its way up the steep, rutted road, Marlowe repeated that to himself. This journey started when I found out that Mary was my mam, and mam was my nana. The revelation had made his head spin for a good few days. In fact, his whole life was still spinning out of control, nearly. Maybe things would be better now that he was finally in Ireland. At least that's what everyone had said repeatedly. It had taken him several weeks before he agreed that heading to the Beara Peninsula to the old cottage in Glengariff might be a move in the right direction. A chance to start afresh, son, Mary said. Don't feckin' call me that, Mary. You'll never be my mam. She had teared up. Ah, Christ, don't be like that, Marlowe. It is what it is now, for God's sake. He looked at his sister and his mother facing him across the table in their new avatars as his mother and grandmother. You keep telling me no one in Glengariff knows, but are you sure? They both nodded. No one, not in Ireland, not even here in London. Mam reached out and took his hand in hers, squeezing it hard as Mary continued. Any other way and we'd have lost you. I'd have lost you, Marlowe. Mam wiped her eyes. Yes, Mary would have lost you. Do you understand? 4 months later at the airport, Mary had pressed a medallion into his palm and hugged him. Write every week and ring us when you can. Mam said there used to be a phone box by the Garda station in the village. Ring me at the surgery. I know Dr. Khan won't mind. I'll ring Mam when I can. Mrs. Kelly won't mind giving her a shout across the landing. Okay, but call me too, Marlowe. Now, as he peered into the darkness outside the bus, he ran his finger around the smooth oval edge of the holy medal in his coat pocket. St. Jude. What the feck, Mary? I'm not a fecking lost cause.
It was wonderful. There's so much great Irishness in the novel. There's so many voices. As soon as he gets to Glengariff as well, it really goes wild. I'm going to move on to Chloe's Sunburn, which is a beautiful, intense, at times painful and ecstatic depiction of first love, adolescent anxieties, and the realities of growing up in rural, small-town Ireland, and also as kind of being in conflict with one's community. We follow a woman called Lucy from the age of 15 to 20, whose changing view and relationship with her friend Susanna changes both of their lives. So could you talk about the setting of the novel, both the place and time, because most of the novel is set in 1992, which was 1 year before homosexuality was decriminalised in Ireland.
Yeah, so in terms of setting, it's a really small, fictionalised kind of West Cork village. And I decided to set it there because it's what I know. I'm from West Cork. I'm from a really small village in West Cork. And I wanted to write something that was like decidedly Irish, which is something I hadn't done before. And so when I let myself write essentially about the place I was actually in, it all came really easily. And yeah, then setting it in the early 90s, as you said, just before the decriminalisation. But obviously we follow her for those 5 years. I wanted to kind of make the point that just because the law had changed, social attitudes perhaps hadn't changed. Yeah, obviously it's like a time of huge conflict for Ireland in many, many ways. And I just wanted to reflect that, like, she's a teenager with all her own conflicts going on. And she's such a sort of insular person that all of these things happening in the world, she's actually not really paying attention to. It's more about like my problems, my struggle here in my tiny town, you know, the rest of the world, it doesn't really matter to her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's, I suppose, true of the way of, you know, I don't want to speak down about adolescence, but that does feel quite true to adolescence.
Yeah.
The urgency of your own dramas, kind of the center of gravity of your life.
Yeah.
She's a very likable character, I think, despite that.
Yeah.
So I think in any small community, going against the grain is going to cause trouble, even if it's just like wearing purple tights. Mm-hmm. I really remember wanting to wear purple tights growing up and just thinking, can't get away with it here, I need to go to London. And so there's an active and kind of a passive intolerance. So Susanna and Lucy's relationship how do you think it might have unfolded in a different place? For example, maybe is there a social expectation that's locked in a way in this small town for, say, Lucy in Crossmore, more so than it is for Susanna in Dublin later on. Because the place, Crossmore, it doesn't sour on Lucy as I would have expected it to. You know, I think that maybe this is just me, but I think the default mode of coming from a small town and feeling like you're being watched and feeling like you can't experiment and feeling like, you know, that you can't go against the grain would turn you off the place or make you want to flee. And she doesn't have that instinct.
Yeah, I think her trouble is, well, it's her trouble, but also it's a good quality. She wants so badly to fit in where she's from. And I think in her mind, she thinks, you know, this is my hometown. I have every right to be here, but I just have to be a different person if I'm going to be here. And she can't let go of the fact that, you know, she can't really be who she is in that town. So yeah, she bends over backwards to morph herself into something else, to exist there, rather than just rejecting the town. In terms of like if it would play out differently in another time, in another place, it's really hard to say because a lot of the issues that Lucy has, obviously they're coming from like external forces like the society that she's living in. Her mother, exactly. But a lot of it is coming from within as well. There's this internalized homophobia that she has. And as she gets older, you know, as she grows out of her adolescence, there's sort of a lack of respect for herself in a way that she just can't let go, and she just can't let herself be who she is. I think that's something that is a part of who she is as a person. So I think it would be difficult for her anywhere. And even having someone like Susanna, who's so, you know, willing to be open and willing to be supportive, and still she'd rather say no to Susanna. She'd rather say no to like the best thing in her life and still try and fit in, you know. Which I enjoyed that aspect of her when I was writing the book, because it would have been so easy to go, okay, Susanna, let's try it.
Yeah.
You know, let's
it's
see
also
how, you know.
very feminist to allow that story to exist.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing worse than, you know, women having to be morally upstanding and having to make the right choices in books.
Yeah.
The obligatory role model, you know.
Yeah, I think she's kind of an anti-hero in a way. Like, people who read it have said, like, she is frustrating because every time you think she's going to make the right decision, she doesn't.
Could you read us a little bit first?
I will, yeah. So this is close to the beginning of the book, about the town that they're in, Crossmore. Here the days drip by as slow as half-melted candle wax. Time is hard and soft at once in Crossmore. It is the meeting place of the old world and the new, I think. Once it was a big and important town, with a train track and a heaving mart, I've heard. There were plenty of young people, plenty of opportunities for them. Grandparents and nuns like to remember it, and they tell stories so well that I remember this version of Crossmore without ever having lived in it. There are 2 photographs of that old Crossmore in St. Joseph's Secondary School. One showing a steaming train with windows full of passengers waving, and the other showing crowds in the centre of the village. That Crossmore is very far away now. I sometimes wonder if the rest of the world even knows that we're still here. There is no need to come by anymore. The train has stopped running and the track has been eaten by grass and wildflowers. The mart has been relocated. There are more thorn bushes than people. Soon the sprawling farms around us will be halved and sold and split between children, and halved and sold again, and the city people will come and buy up that land, and when they build their houses to live in during the summer, we will be worth visiting. They will make Crossmore important again, even with their absences. It's the money that does it, although we will pretend that it isn't. Right now we're between uses, and it's very quiet. The last census reported that there are only 335 year-round residents in Crossmore. But as a year-round resident, I can say that number sounds awfully high. It feels like it's the same 30 or 40 of us milling around all the time. This is one of the few things that Granny and I agree on. They must be all hiding, she said. And sometimes I still wonder what ditch or ruin they're in, and if they'd let me join them. I suppose it's nice to live somewhere quiet. To me, I think a city would be an overwhelming melting pot. Dad likes to remind us that there's no chance of a bombing in a place as far away as Crossmore. It's safe, it's airtight. In a place so small, there isn't much room for wild thinking or ambition. That can be a comfort. We may be born unique, but the village blends us all into one person. Superstitious, religious, traditional, that's all. The only differences between us are slight. Protestants among the Catholics, a few rich among the poor, those who have children and those who can't. The only true deviance from normality in Crossmore is Katrina O'Shea, Susanna's mother. She is the stray we all recoil and marvel at. She lives in the closest thing Crossmore has to a big house, with no mortgage and no obvious income and no husband at home. A rural socialite is a funny thing to be. I wonder how she copes with the attention. Her life has always been scandalous, which makes Susanna's life sadder and more dazzling than the rest of ours could ever hope to be. Them O'Sheas are no Catholics, Mother says, as though it levels her and Katrina out. When I compare Katrina to Mother and the other women in Crossmore, I don't know which of their lives I should be aiming for. What is worse, to be remarkable or unremarkable? I wish I had never noticed that we girls replace the women and that the boys seamlessly replace the men and that we all follow a pattern.
Fantastic.
It's torturous having so little time and wanting to hear from you, also wanting to hear more of the reading. But we'll get on to Donal Ryan, who probably a lot of people in here know his work. Heart Be at Peace is a follow-up to The Spinning Heart, his first novel, which was nominated for the Booker. That one was set just after the financial crash, and this one is set in 2019, am I right?
Yep.
And so I'd love to know what the world of returning to the Spinning Heart was like, and if you knew that that was going to happen when you were writing the Spinning Heart, that there was that sense that I could take this up later, or as we're going to call it from now on, Pulla Culm Tobin. Apparently it was your mother who suggested.
It really was, yeah. I knew shortly after The Spinning Heart was published that I'd have to write a follow-up because my mum worked in Tesco's in Nina. Actually, she worked in Tesco's almost until the day she died last year, and she loved it. But people would queue at her till all the time, and they might queue with like a carrot behind somebody with a huge trolley full of messages. And the person would say, "Go ahead, sure, you've only got a carrot." And they go, "No, I have to talk to Anne." And they almost always wanted to ask Ma'am about Spinning Heart. And they'd go, "Anne, how's Bobby Mahan now?" Mum would go, "Oh, for God's sake, he's fine. Sure, it says in the end of the book he's fine." And they'd go, No, it's not quite clear at the end of the book whether Bobby's fine or not." And Mum would go, "Do you know what you should do now? Go into Limerick to Donal. He's in UL, he's in the Schumann building. You should draw a little map for people. She'd give him, what bus to get and the whole lot." And it arrived to my door in UL, which could be, a little bit of an interference at times. But Mum would keep saying, "Will you please, in the name of God, just write a sequel to Spinning Heart so people will know what happened." Because you didn't make it clear at the end. And actually she's right. There definitely is kind of a very literary ambiguity at the end of Spinning Heart that doesn't work at all. It's not quite clear what happened. So Mum told me to do it, and I always knew I'd have to do it. So I'm just sorry she didn't get to read it, poor Mum, before she passed away. But that's why, yeah, it was commissioned by my mother, and you've got no choice, really, when you're told to do something by your mum. Eventually you'll have to do it.
So it opens with Bobby Mahan, who's the closest that we have to a protagonist in the book. So like The Spinning Heart, it's a polyvocal novel. I think there's 21 individual voices. So he has gotten over the crash. He's kind of recovered from the financial crash to a degree, but he's still struggling with guilt and anxiety, and including his so-called friends are kind of blackmailing him over a photo that resulted from a trip to Amsterdam. This is, at the beginning of the novel. But he's in a happy marriage with a woman called Triana. They've got 2 children, but there's anxiety about the children. Bobby says that Triana frets and holds her phone in her hand, looking down at it every second they're out of the house. "They're dealing right there on the street in Nina," she says. "They're out there in the village too." So in terms of what's going on now, if the last book was kind of dominated by the recession, the impacts of that, it seems to be that drugs are the central kind of impact on the town here. So in the past, I suppose there were those religious alliances and complicities, but now what's dividing people and what's forming these kind of blockades in the town are the trading of drugs, the dealing of drugs, and I guess with that comes the idea that you're complicit in something as a small community. You don't really whose van that is, and where these things are happening, and so by effect you're part of it.
That's it, exactly. I mean, when I wrote Spinning Heart, I had no ambition about ever being published, so I decided I will just articulate my concerns about society as it is now, and I'll write about all my own problems because no one's ever going to read it except my wife. So it was totally fine, and I could just, I could indulge my rage at the way society had suddenly crumbled, and we were kind of being blamed as public servants for the whole thing. Suddenly, it was civil servants' obscene wages and pensions that caused the crash, not developers or banks or anything else. And so that's what I wrote it about. And Bobby was very much he was a kind of paragon, almost a cipher for a person who feels the weight of responsibility and obligation. And when I wrote Heart Be at Peace, similarly, I decided to just express my own fears again. And my biggest fear now is the fact that there are drug dealers operating right outside my estate in Limerick, where I live. There's a lovely greenway built for families to walk in peace. It's a greenway is a beautiful thing to have, unless you have drug dealers on the greenway selling drugs to children, which we have. So Bobby is suffused with rage over this, as I am myself. Bobby's chapter in Heart Be at Peace is very autobiographical. In the opening passage, actually, he elbows a chap in the windpipe. And I felt such relief writing that, because I so wanted to elbow a guy like that in the windpipe at the time I wrote it. Or shortly after. There was a guy at the door of my mum's hospice, and he was just standing at the door for the whole week, the last week of my mum's life, screaming like a banshee because he'd been ejected from the hospice because he'd been causing trouble. He was drunk and high, and his mother-in-law was in there and he was screaming, I just want to see her, say goodbye to her, and they won't let me. And so every day the poor security guards had to try to deal with this guy, and people who were, you know, in a contingent moment in their lives, passing in and out, were scared of him. And, you know, people had to kind of walk around him, and I just really wanted to knock him out. So I had Bobby do it for me, and I just felt this beautiful catharsis and relief doing it, you know. So it's a very immediate novel. Spinning Heart was the same, was very immediate, and that's the same. And it's great freedom to be able to do that, you know, to be able to sublimate your anxieties and fears and atavistic urges into language. Thank God for it.
It also, I suppose, makes people, there is a relief in the sense that people can read the book and see, like, this is happening. You know, I'm not being gaslit, this is real. And that moves things along a little bit.
That's it, absolutely. I mean, I think until recently, drug dealing, we all knew drugs existed and people had to buy and sell drugs. But it was very occluded, it was very abstract. But it's, in the last few years, it's become so open, it's so in your face now, it's so overt. I saw a lady haggling over a crack pipe outside the GPO in Dublin a few weeks ago. And I watch drug deals take place in Limerick, and it's so slick, you know, and I find, I watch dealers, they don't look at their customer, they'll just hand over the drugs, take the money, and very often it happens at intersections, at traffic lights. People will know at a certain time to be waiting, they'll know the car coming, at a red light the car will stop, or back from the lights, and just to watch it, it's incredible. You'd almost admire it, it's in a way, it's so strange.
Will you read a section from us?
Sure.
Is it Bobby that you're going to read from?
No, I won't actually, because I'm sulking over Bobby, because my wife was asked to read Trina, who's Bobby's wife, so I presumed they'd ask me to read Bobby for the audiobook. But they said, actually, Donal, you're more of a Rory. So, and they're right, in fairness, you know, Bobby was aspirational from me. He's not who I am at all. But just to be really queer, I'm going to read from Brian, because Brian in Spinning Heart was fairly autobiographical. And but at this point, Brian and I have diverged philosophically. And actually, I must have copied this from you, Cauvery, because I wrote this long after I read it and loved The Inheritance, and I have St. Jude here as well. Oh, so it's a nice synchronicity. This is Brian anyway, and he sounds a little bit derisive about his mum at the start, but he's not. He realised quickly that he loves her deeply and is very afraid of upsetting her. Every time I went anywhere my whole life, the mother used to be boo-hooing and making a show of me and tormenting the old fella with her carry-on. She'd be saying novenas by the new time and drowning me in holy water, filling my pockets and my wallet up with bits of relics and things that were touched off of relics and slips of paper with little one-liner prayers on them. I found a whole prayer inside my passport the last time I was in Shannon Airport. Cut out from a Sacred Heart Messenger or one of those lunatic magazines that give the mother and father such peace. They give me peace too, if I'm honest, just the sight of them on an armchair with my father's reading glasses closed on top of them. The absolute sameness of them after all these years. The resoluteness of them. The same things being said over and over again in slightly different ways. The prayer was a plea for intercession to St. Jude, whom I presumed at the time to be the patron saint of travellers and adventurers. Folded up and with Mam's handwriting on the top of it in blue biro. Dear Brian, please just say this once in morning, once at night. Love, Mam. X. And I was only going to Amsterdam that time for Colm Shanahan's stag weekend. I found out since that Jude is the patron saint of hopeless cases and desperate situations. No one knows you like your mother, no matter how you try to hide the truth of yourself. Thanks very much.
Now is when I do the frantic scramble on deciding which questions to ask. I have many and I won't get to them, but would you like to talk more? No, I won't do that. I'm going to bundle two questions together and you can respond to whichever you'd rather. The first is about, I suppose, the emigration story versus an immigration story. You know, I suppose that there's the cliche that all stories are one of two things: man goes on a journey or man comes to town. And it is both those things in a way. The community are very welcoming to him, surprisingly, apart from the border collies, which anyone who's been in the Irish countryside knows all about. Because he's been kind of pre-approved, he's had this, you know, the stories have already, you know, surrounded him before he's come. So I'm wondering how conscious you were of writing kind of an immigration story with this book and writing into that maybe tradition in Ireland? That's one question, and I'll ask you another, which is, so yes, this man goes on a journey, or a man comes to town, is another way of saying that novels are always about change. Either the person changes or the place changes, or ideally both. I'm wondering, is this a novel about Glengarriff's capacity to change, to adapt to Marlowe? Because there's a lot of stigma that he represents, and across both timelines in the novel, paternity, disability, children outside of wedlock. There's all of these cultures of petty rivalries and fierce loyalties and cover-ups and rumour, which aren't conducive to change. So on the one hand, there's the question of the immigration, and the other on the stigma and capacity to change.
Yeah, I mean, Caoilinn, none of those themes I wanted to write about. They just kind of evolved in the book. And I think I was just telling a story. And I suppose a lot of those themes to do with, stigmas with disability, or the circumstances of your birth, all of that. There are so many hundreds of stories milling around in rural Ireland, in the whole of Ireland, And I think over the years, just by some kind of symbiosis, just kind of those stories were in me. And so I never set out to write a book with any theme. I just wanted to tell a story. And then all those themes just emerged as I wrote. And a lot of them I was aware of only after I finished writing. I thought, oh my God, I did write something about, the stigma against disability, for example. So, yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question.
Sorry, I gave you too jumbled a question. It's lovely, everything that you said is very interesting. And how about on the immigration side? Did you feel that were you really curious as to how the town was going to adapt to Marlowe? Or was he going to be subsumed by it because it's such a powerful community? Yeah,
and it is. It's a very quiet community, and I kind of definitely used our own experience. Having bought, we were literally the first brown family that arrived in this really, really remote valley, and we were just totally embraced by people. And it's hard to know whether we were embraced because we were so different. That we were just embraced because as posing no threat in any form or fashion, or whether that's just the way people are in rural Ireland. They're actually, for communities that are quite insular in the geography, they're actually quite welcoming in their being. So I think the way Marlowe was received in the community was exactly how we were received, my husband and I, when we bought the place.
Wow, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah. Listening to a politician recently and from the Green Party in Australia talking about why they still do door knocking, and actually the main reason that they said was because they can become so disillusioned at people's choices, especially when you look at election outcomes. Yeah. But when you actually knock on people's doors, people are really willing to have conversations and actually want to. Yeah, and that's very true. I mean, we not just in Glengarriff, not just in West Cork. When we first, from the moment we arrived in Ireland, the commonalities between India and Ireland are so absolutely phenomenal. Like I can't even begin to tell you. Two countries that are so vastly different in their size, with geographical size as well as the population, but in terms of, culture, the obsession with family, the obsession with children, the obsession with having notions, the obsession with, the obsessions of, what are the neighbors going to say? What's your aunt going to say? What's your brother-in-law going to say? All of that is identical. Two countries obsessed with religion, two different religions, of course, but, still obsessed with religion. And even if you're non-practicing, you'll never, ever take the Catholic out of you. You'll never, ever take the Hindu out of you. So all of those are common factors, and so it was quite easy to write. It was quite easy to actually live in Ireland for us, and then for me to be able to write,
you know, it's very similar themes.
Yeah, wonderful. And so much to say. It's the first novel of yours, I believe, that's all Irish characters, and it's so extremely Irish. It's a wonderful license. I'm glad you've taken it. I hope you'll continue to take it. Chloe, I might try and bunch a couple of things together as well, but one thing that's certainly, I suppose, in common there is writing about stigma and intolerance, and social acceptability, also cover-ups of things. By setting the novel in the early 90s, I wonder how conscious you were of generational hurts, because a lot of people who were young in the 90s or young in the noughties really feel the generational kind of gap of why weren't you able to talk about these things? Why is there such a chasm, especially among the mother, Lucy and her mother's relationship? That's, I mean, the most excruciating part of the novel, I feel. And also, the gender dynamics, the gender dynamics in the 90s, I wonder how different you feel they are now. And did you have to kind of go back in writing the novel to render that realistically? Because there really are the group of boys, the group of girls, the ideas about how the other behaves and how the groups interact. Was that something that you had to kind of render to try and get the historical aspect of it right, or does it not feel that far along?
Well, in terms of, the group of boys and the group of girls, I was a teenager sort of in the 2010s, so like later than obviously when things are happening in Sunburn. But like, that's what it was like when I was a teenager, definitely. Like when I was an early teenager especially, it was like, because the primary schools were like the girls' school and the boys' school, so really like, they were like another species. And you'd talk about the boys and the boys' school and you'd be going, I hear that they're doing this and this. Like, it wasn't actually something that I had to think, I wonder what that's like, because it was like that when I was young. But then I think for a character like Lucy, she just takes it too far. She's too aware of the differences between the boys and the girls, maybe in a way that the girls in her group wouldn't be. But it's because she's in a different situation, she feels so different, So it's definitely amplified with her. And then in terms of the generational gap and, her relationship with her parents and everything, it's something that like the character is aware of from the very beginning. Like she says, when she was a small child, she just had this instinct that one day her mother would just get sick of her. And so she's kind of always anticipating it. There's like this unwillingness. Her mother can't give her all her love. She holds it back a bit. And yeah, I do think it's, in part a generational thing, but then obviously the way that Lucy grows up and ends up being queer, like it's something, I think that's the main reason why her and her mother's relationship obviously ends up breaking down.
Her mother's obsessed with normalcy.
Yeah, exactly.
Expectation and fitting in.
Yeah, she's so like, there's a nice boy from down the road who fancies you. Can you just make that work for me, please? And even when she does try to make it work, there's a moment where her mum is delighted. She's like, great, you're going to the Debs together. This is brilliant. But then she starts to pull it back again. And eventually Lucy realizes, I'll never probably be enough for you. I'll never be who you want me to be, even if I do everything by the book, So yeah, that was hard to write because it's not something that you can really write a happy ending into. You can't just make it up and go, but then in the end they were fine and Mum said she loved me and it was great. You have to, there's like an element of realism there, so.
And she turns to nature as well. The descriptions in the novel of nature are really gorgeous. So she's enamoured by Crossmore, and nature, I suppose, is accepting to her. So that makes a lot of sense. Nature is kind of unjudgmental, even though it should be, maybe, given how we treat it. So she frequents the outskirts, the woods, and carves her name into trees. And I'll just quote a little bit. She says, I always thought a place like Crossmore would kill a person like me, but I realise now that places like Crossmore are made for people like me. There's space for me, for us, out on the edges, among the ruins and the hedges and the stone walls. These things are immovable. They belong to the world and cannot be altered. I hope that Susanna and I are like these things. I carve our initials into trees and scratch them onto rocks, hoping that a piece of us will remain in the landscape. And while she's in love, Crossmore, the description of nature in Crossmore is heightened. one line says, the days drip by as slow as melted candle wax. And we get the sense that the seasons changing and the slow progress of nature is kind of controlling the pace of the narrative. Is really, you know, there's a relationship between what's happening in nature and what's happening with the character. I believe you were also writing it partly in lockdown, so I'm curious just about that, writing about nature in that way as being part of what it is to live in a small town.
Yeah,
that inspiration.
That was like, that's pure me, my experience, all the nature elements of the book, because it was lockdown when I was writing it, and I'd be in the house. Luckily, where we are is really remote, so the 2 kilometre thing. Do you remember the 2 kilometre rule? Like, I could do my 2K walk, I could make it a 5K, and I probably wouldn't meet anyone, you know? And so I used to go walking every single day up like little boreens, and I had nothing to be doing, so I'd just be looking at hedges and things and going, God, isn't that gorgeous? You know, and I was so bored in lockdown. So like a lot of the stuff, the nature descriptions is stuff that I would have been on a walk and writing on my phone in my notes, and then later I'd try and somehow work it in, you know. So a lot of that is actually what I was feeling about the landscape around me. But yeah, then in terms of like nature playing into the narrative, like seasons are very important in the book. Obviously, like it's mainly summer, but then there are spring, winter, and autumn as well. And so I wanted to make it as clear as possible where in the year you were, based on the way the trees are and the sky and the weather and everything like that. Yeah, I think like nature and the town itself are almost a character in the book. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make them very present.
They absolutely are, and it makes West Cork sound like you actually have distinct seasons. I'm from Galway, we don't have that. I'm very envious. Donal, again, I think this is probably the last question I'm going to be able to ask, and then we'll open to audience questions. So smushing is going to happen. History, in both of your novels in particular, in Cauvery and in Donal's, history's never far from the surface. It's never far out of earshot. It's there, obviously, in the relationship between the spinning heart and the novel, so there's kind of a meta thing going on. There's an invisible ear that the narratives are being told to. And in rural Ireland, you know, they're all first-person stories, so we don't know who these stories are being told to. You assume, if it's rural Ireland, that it's either a priest or a policeman or a police person. I'd love to hear about that aspect of the novel, of who it's being told to. And then maybe to sneak in another one, and a lovely aspect of that polyphonic structure is that you get the coexistence of generations, which is something that we all live with, but you actually get to see it in the novel in a way that we don't really get to see it in real life. We only really have access to other generations on the main, let's say via our students or via our family. Like, really your social circles are largely going to be around your demographic. Mm-hmm. So there's something really lovely in that, in seeing the coexistence of these generations, and how the recent past has affected them, what their prospects are, how they think about the future because of where they're positioned, let's say, in terms of their age.
Yeah, just on the who the characters are speaking to, actually, it's quite a vexed issue in my head. I was never quite sure, but the vague idea I had with Spinning Heart was that there was an invisible confessor, as you say, who had a veil of gauze between them and the speaker, so that the speaker couldn't see them. And they couldn't see the speaker, so they were not known to each other. And because The Spinning Heart and Heartbeat Peace actually are two quite silent novels, there isn't much dialogue. People don't speak out loud. It's an explication of the character's interiority for the most part, and they're mostly saying things they wouldn't say out loud. So they're both very unreal novels, which is kind of paradoxical because they're both kind of billed as hyper-realist novels. But my idea was that people in the novels were kind of confessing. They were opening up in a way that they wouldn't naturally do. And so I was thinking, up until about the, mid-90s, in the small village I'm from, if you committed a very bad sin, like adultery or murder or something, and you had it weighing on your soul, you couldn't confess to the local priest because you'd meet him every day. So you'd have to go to Limerick, or maybe for something very bad, you might go as far as like Drogheda, somewhere crazy like that. Somewhere that kind of only existed in our imaginations as kind of a possible place, somewhere up around the north, near the border, just to expunge your guilt, so you wouldn't be known to the priest up there. And then when the Franciscans actually came to Limerick, to my Ross, it was great. People were flocking to the Franciscans because you could tell those boys anything. and they definitely wouldn't betray you, you know. They were closest to Jesus, we were thinking. So that's what I kind of had that idea that the confessor is invisible and not known to the speaker, so they are free to unveil the darkest parts of themselves. And that idea actually, both books are quite compressed, and you have a kind of cacophony. I hadn't heard the word polyphonic until The Spinning Heart was published about a year, and it was flying high, and it was going great. And I was swaggering around, thinking I was great. And I was in London being interviewed for The Independent, and the chap said to me, "So Donal, why did you decide to write this novel in a polyphonic form?" And I went, "Jesus, what does polyphonic mean?" Of course, if I hadn't panicked, I'd realised, obviously, a poly is many and phonic is sounds or voices, but I panicked and I went to the gents to Google polyphonic. Luckily, I'd been given a gift of an iPhone not long before that. And then I came back, of course, and he said, "And actually, I've been given a proof copy of your next novel, and I've detected quite a brittle intertextual dialectic between the two works." And oh, fuck. So I had to go again. It's, you know, it is actually a drawback, isn't it? When you write novels, people presume you know all the words in the world, and there are loads of words that I don't know. And I kind of have to bluff all the time. What was my point before I said that, Caoilinn? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, about the compression, and that's true. I think that we tend to form our social circles in rural areas in particular from whoever's available at the time. So it could be your granny, you know, it could be your dad's friend on the road, you know. And I think there is more of a tendency towards intergenerational communication in small villages. You see it particularly with Gaelic games, you know, with old people who have gone to every single match that the club has played for the last 70 years, you know. And you hear these beautiful conversations, this banter between old and young people around sport. And actually, I really resented seeing, like, you know, a bank using it in an ad where a young fella runs up behind and all that, and he knocks his cap off, and you know, because they're trying to cash in on that beautiful relationship, that lovely sacred thing, you know, they're trying to make money out of it. They're saying, "Oh, we're a bank that sponsor Gaelic games." Oh, feck off. Really, you know, everything gets diluted by ads and by money, but, you know, that idea is very real in rural Ireland. It really is, that, you know, you will talk openly to people who are generations removed from you, and it's a lovely thing. It really is, and it's a lovely way to grow up. Now, it can go horribly wrong, of course, like everything. I mean, every dynamic can be corrupted, but for the most part, it is a case that if you live somewhere small and remote, you will have a very variegated peer group, age-wise. Not necessarily culturally, you know, we do tend to still be fairly monolithic in rural Ireland, you know, but that's all changing, I suppose.
Yeah. And you might expect that it's going to be farmers, but it's not. It's a lot of people who work in different...
That's it. This is the thing, actually. I think people think of rural Ireland, they think farms and farmers. But, like, I'm from a rural working class family. My dad drove a van, and my mum worked sporadically in a betting office in town. And so we were very much working class family. My parents didn't have third level educations, you know, and we're always kind of on the breadline, but always fine. My parents made us feel as though we were loaded as kids, you know. I mean, and they worked very hard to do that, but we were the part of the rural working class and still are, and kind of an overlooked demographic, to be honest, an overlooked strata of society. You know, you think countryside, farms, city, professions, you know, no one thinks about the people who drive the vans or work in the bookies or work in the shop or work in Tesco's, very much.
So much more I want to ask, but I have to do the right thing. And if you go quiet, I'll return to questions here. But if there are questions, now would be the time. There's one just in the front here, so we probably have a microphone. Yeah, just coming down to the front. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all four of you, for some very profound, beautiful conversation. I wanted to ask the three authors where the idea of the title of their novel came from, and whether they had it before they started writing, during, or after. And I guess in Donal's case, it should be both novels. Thank you.
Well, for every novel I write, I find a novel or a title by opening my complete works of Yeats, and I open to a random page and I find a phrase. It's never let me down yet. It's like magic. And Yeats gives me a phrase or a word that I can use. Brilliant. I recommend it. Just any random Yeats poem, you'll find the title for your novel.
I was curious as to whether you were going to call the final, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the final line of the novel is "a good, good man." And if I had written that line, I'd been like, there's my title. Because it's partly what the book is about.
That would have been a good title, actually, Caoilinn. And I've been told my titles are very wishy-washy and airy-fairy and unmemorable. Anodyne, yeah, but I like
you wanted to have the call back to heart, I guess, with having heart, the spinning heart, you know?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I needed to have a heart there. And, you know, and I had no title. And genuinely, I opened my complete Yates, and then I saw, oh, Heart Be at Peace. I said, lovely, here we go. Yeah.
Great. How about you, Chloe? How did your title come about?
So the title Sunburn it was literally the last thing I came up with when I was submitting the book, and I was like, oh, feck, like I need a name for the book. And so I kind of thought of it quickly, and I thought, look, it can change, like it doesn't really matter. And then I was asked, like, why is it called Sunburn? And I had to kind of come up with something. So I've come up with loads of like metaphors now since I named it that. But yeah, it was like a last minute thing. But now I like to say that it's, you know, a sunburn is like, it's a bittersweet thing, you know? Like you might have had a really nice day in the sun, your summer, but then it's painful as well. And I think the book is very bittersweet in that way. So that's what I say now. But it was very last minute, actually.
Well, for me, I started off calling it The Inheritance. It was a working title. And my publisher was very happy with it. So, and then, as I wrote the book, I realized it was literally the perfect title because it's more than just it's more than just what he inherits physically as a cottage. It's all everything else that goes with it, and all the bits of inheritances that other people have in their lives, with not in terms of something physical, but in terms of their history and stuff. So it started off as a working title, but I'm really delighted that I went with it.
Yeah, there's a very strong, it works in so many different ways.
Yeah.
But certainly, and also the idea that you can't really, or you shouldn't really ignore history or try and discount it. Yeah. There's very, very strong, bonds between that in the landscape and in the way that the culture has grown up. Yeah. Wonderful, thanks, great question. There's another one just there.
That was a real pleasure. Thank you very much to listen to all that. In terms of Ireland with its liberalisation, if you look at small villages and the orthodoxy, there's always the other. And as Ireland changes, who are the new other that are going to be alienated?
I think from a queer perspective, I definitely think things are changing in terms of people's attitude towards gay, lesbian, bisexual people. And from a queer perspective, I now think that trans people are the other, definitely. Not just in Ireland, but everywhere. But I definitely think, unfortunately, Ireland is thrown in with that. And I think that we're seeing more and more of people aren't getting away with being homophobic anymore. You can't do that anymore. But people are getting away with being transphobic, unfortunately. And so I think, from a queer perspective, I would say that they're the new other, I think.
Gosh, that's a really interesting question, and I actually can't think of any other group that could be othered, other than the ones that are already been othered. If you know what I mean. I think as the very obvious are refugees and asylum seekers, and. Their lot is actually it is such a sad lot, because they have been, they've just been othered by one sentence, by labels. And the reality really is quite different, and I think in Ireland, particularly, for Irish people who have sought asylum, have sought refuge all over the world. It's a bitter thing to think that that is not sort of being recognized, and yet I would say that it's as a country we are very slow to other. As a country, that's my experience, and I think the bad news gets inflated. Way more than the good news and the good people.
Absolutely, yeah. I think the headlines in Ireland around the far right and racism, it's absolutely inflated, and it is small groups of agitators who scream the loudest. And they're not articulate people, but they will scream really loud, and they'll have a few catchphrases, and they're more other than the people who are purportedly being othered. But for the most part, Irish people, as Cauvery said, are welcoming and open-minded and generous. But I mean, it's impossible not to have divisions in society, you know. And when a traditionally, you know, hegemonic society, you know, where you have predominantly white people who are Christians, you know, when that changes, of course, there's going to be fractures and discord. It's impossible for that not to happen, and that's true of every place on earth, you know. But we do tend to self-flagellate an awful lot in Ireland, and kind of presume that we're the worst and we're the only ones to do these things. Like we're, you know, we kind of have an idea that we were the only country to have mother and baby homes and have that kind of thing. But that happened all over the world. But we really do tend to over-flagellate, you know, and we tend to take on too much guilt for things that we couldn't have had any control over. So I decided a few years ago to feel no guilt about anything anybody else has done, to just feel my own guilt for my own actions. It's way better, healthier. It's way better.
Wonderful. Have you got other questions? There's one at the back, just there. We can self-congratulate as much as we self-flagellate, though.
Oh, I think so, yeah. Oh, but the flagellation is so intense
What
and painful.
is it about Irish writing that is just so extraordinary?
I was going to ask anyone on the stage, as writers writing in Ireland, a little bit to your point, Donal, on people knowing who you are, does that ever serve as a blocker, the small townness and people knowing who you are, who your mum is, in the writing process? Does it ever kind of block you or make you think about who's going to read your work?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there are things I've written about that I regret writing about, and there are place names I've used that I shouldn't have used, and I've described events taking place in certain places that I shouldn't have, that I really upset people, and I've really regretted. I hate the thought of upsetting anybody, and there were things before my mum died that she said, don't write about that, and I can't because she told me not to. So I definitely can't. But genuinely, I was at a funeral in Drumculliher in West Limerick a few years ago, and I was sympathising, as you do, and 3 people just turned like this and wouldn't shake hands with me. I went, what's wrong with them? And it turned out they're convinced that I stole their lives for my novels. And I'm using their lives over and over again. These are people now I don't know that well, who I hadn't really ever met before, you know, when I became a writer. And they're convinced, and they actually are so convinced, they've actually become convinced my wife, and Marie, writes all my books, because she is closer to them and is more able to steal from them. And that because she's ashamed of this, she uses my name. So she's writing all the books. Yeah, and the rumour has taken hold in West Limerick, you know. It's burgeoning. I don't mind that. I don't mind at all.
There's a book in that.
Absolutely. Oh, it's been written, though. Yeah, and a film made about it with Glenn Close.
Any other responses to that question?
Well, I actually had one of our neighbours in Glengariff actually read the book, read The Inheritance after I finished it. Before I sent it off to my editors and publishers, they vetted it to make sure that there was nobody identified, nobody, you know, and I hadn't. I mean, there's no character in the book that's based on anybody there. But despite that, when I had the book launch in Bantry, somebody came up to me and said, "Was it Mossy Hannafin from our group?" No, but he drives a bus as well. And I said, "No, but it's not him." You know, because I mean, as much as I interchange names and surnames, but sure, there's so many Mossies in West Cork. So.
I always write about somewhere adjacent, Common or Leitrim, you know, just somewhere close, but not.
Yeah.
To avoid that danger.
Yeah. That's
You're all braver than me, clearly.
That's why I chose like a fictional name for the town, because I didn't want anyone to think like, oh, well, this is definitely... Even though, like, when I was writing that, I didn't think anyone was ever going to read it. And then it was only afterwards, like, I have had people say to me, like, is this character based on me or this person that we know? And I'm like, no, oh my God. It's so embarrassing when people say to you, like, well,
Absolutely.
this is obviously this person and this is this person. And I'm like, no, I have the imagination. Like, that's what I'm doing here. So, yeah, you just have to kind of put your head in the sound and be like, look, if people think it's about them, that's fine, you know?
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. I based Bobby Mahan on my oldest friend. We're friends since childhood, and I based a lot of Bobby on him. And when he read The Spinning Heart as a manuscript, he's a big reader, he got really emotional. I know he's a really tough guy, you know, he wouldn't be given to displays of emotion. He's a builder and all his life, and he wouldn't be talking about his feelings very much, but he had a tear in his eye, and he said, Jesus, man, you must really love me. Yeah, I do, man. I kind of got embarrassed too, you know, and both kind of, you know, because Jesus, that's me, isn't it? You know, and he was thrilled. It was like most people are thrilled to be in your book, aren't they?
Yeah.
We've got another question just here.
Thank you so much. That was really enjoyable. This is a question kind of for all of you, but I'm most familiar with Donal's writing. I think the idiosyncrasies of the way people speak in rural Ireland is something that makes your kind of books so amazing for Irish readers. But I'm wondering how that kind of Hiberno English translates to the international literary scene. Like, do people understand it? Do they kind of see the magic of it? Or is it kind of lost on them in some way?
Oh, it seems to translate really well, actually, thank God. It seems to be actually more understandable in foreign countries than it is in Ireland sometimes, which is great. But I remember actually my first US review was written by a journalist from the Huffington Post when The Spinning Heart came out years and years ago. And at the time it was doing really well in America, and I thought it was great again. And the first line of the review was, The Spinning Heart is the worst book ever written. And then there were 7 paragraphs of absolute invective. I mean, she hated the book, she hated me, she seemed to hate Ireland, she hated everything. And then at the very end she said, and I'm sick of hearing people praise this guy, Donal Ryan. She definitely called me Donal. For his use of demotic language, because all that is the slang and grit of his own people. And I thought that line was so beautiful. I forgive her for the terrible review. Actually, it was so bad, the HuffPost wouldn't publish it, so she put it on her blog instead. She was raging. But the slang and grit, though, and people do appreciate that, because like the way people use language, you know, the way people shape language to their own ends, and the way language is shaped by place and by use, I think is so beautiful, you know, and people do seem to appreciate that. And mostly, like slang phrases and demotic phrases and vernacular, no matter where it's from, I think the meaning is nearly always evident to some degree from the context, and I think people do enjoy it. Now, I know it does really irk some people as well, and that's fine. I don't mind upsetting people in that way. But yeah, I mean, I love it so much myself, like, and I mean, my ambition as a writer was to represent rural Irish speech in as real a way as possible. It didn't veer into hawkery or caricature, but that was very real, because it's the way I speak myself, you know. I said I'll use my own voice. What do you think?
Sometimes, like, if I've written dialogue and then I go back and read it again, there are rare times that I go, what does that say? Because it's too, like, yeah, sometimes it's too much, and it makes sense at the time when I'm writing it down. But yeah, I remember, like, I was nervous. There's loads of Irish names in this book, and I remember when it was coming out, I wasn't so nervous that the queer aspect was going to be alienating to people. I thought the Irishness would be more alienating, and that people wouldn't understand, you know, like, things. Like, a lot of this book is about the Debs, for example, and I was like, are people going to know? Obviously, there's a quick Google, it'll tell you, but, like, it takes you out at the moment if you're having to do that. But again, yeah, like, people just connect to it, and they don't, those little differences, like, it doesn't bother people, I think. They're happy to have something that's, like, authentically from the place it's meant to be from. Yeah, so I think it definitely adds to it.
Yeah. Well, I have wondered, you know, from the start of the book, when I started writing, I have wondered, God, will anybody outside of Ireland ever get this? But then I remind myself that, you know, I have read books set in other parts of the world, you know, using that, and where writers have used the vernacular there, and I've totally enjoyed it, totally loved it, so why not the other way around? And it was interesting, you know, when I started writing this book, I might have only been maybe 3 or 4 pages in, and I suddenly balked, and I said, oh, I don't know whether I can write an Irish book. And I said it to my son. I was in the car with him, and I said it to him, and he just turned around to me and he said, oh, for feck's sake, Mum, would you ever just write the book and stop procrastinating? And so then, you know, I just literally from then on, I just wrote it, you know, and I didn't hold back. trying to explain the Irishness or the vernacular or anything. I just wrote it as my ear heard it, you know.
Did any of you have any pushback or any good little juicy anecdotes about pushback from editors? You know, no one had to turn a lilo into a floaty?
No. No, not from mine anyway.
I don't think so, actually.
Yeah. I didn't, no.
Okay, that's great.
Oh, one thing actually. Inside, like if you say something like he's inside in Nina, he's inside in town, like the in is you know, unnecessary. It's tautological, but it's a real aspect of a rural Irish dramatic. But it's very hard for an English editor to get their head around that. But they've come to terms with it now. You know, 8 books in, they've started to realise. You know, people will say he's inside in Nina, he's inside in town, outside, you know, inside in. Yeah. Or he's abroad in the art. Like, abroad means a foreign country. No, it does not. Abroad could be in the next room. She's abroad in the kitchen.
I think we have time for one last question. There is one. Yes, there's one just behind you there.
It's just a quick question, but what's next for you all? I'm just interested in terms of your writing.
Thank you. That's a lovely final question.
Wait at me. Well, I'm just going to keep writing, I suppose, because I've no choice, because I've been paid in advance for another book, and so and the advance is spent a long time ago, and the book isn't written, so I have to keep writing until it's finished. And then I'm thinking of becoming a lorry driver full time. Genuinely, a friend of mine broke his leg, and he'd just been given a haulage contract to transport cattle to slaughter. And he broke his legs, he couldn't do it. And he knew I had a license to drive lorries, so I said I'd do it for him. And so I started this thing where I'd be the last human these poor animals met before they were slaughtered. And I hug each cow individually. No, genuinely, it was a little chat. And I hate doing it. I hate driving them to their death, but at least I can be kind to them as I do it. Not that other lorry drivers wouldn't be kind, but I do tend to have, like, you know, a real moment with them before they go to their doom. So I'm thinking of doing that full time.
You could also just
Genuinely.
go vegan. That or veganism.
Seriously. Yeah. Sorry, Caoilinn, couldn't hear you there.
No. I just said that or veganism.
Oh, yeah.
Two options.
Oh, yeah,
Lorry
no, I have
driver.
become vegan, actually, since I started that. Yeah.
Well, I've actually already started my next book, and it's this time my writing is taking me back to India, and yeah, so that's where I am.
Wise. Tight-lipped. No, not too much India, but not to say too much.
I've just finished writing my second book, and it's coming out kind of this time next year, autumn next year. And so, yeah, it's so strange, like it's finished now, but it's ages before it comes out. So I'm going to start on the third one, so I don't like lose the momentum. But I'm kind of putting it off. I keep saying, like, I'll start it now tomorrow, I'll start it tomorrow. So maybe on Monday I'll actually start the third one.
Do you need to have a fully formed idea?
I have the idea, I just need to actually do it. Yeah.
What's the second one called?
It's called, well, right now it's called Heap Birth Upon It. Heap Birth Upon It. So
nice.
I'm pretty sure that's what it's going to be called, but it's a year away, so we'll see.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much for being such a warm and lovely audience. Hope to see you at many other things throughout the day. The authors are all going to sign their books outside, so we'd love to see you there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Caoilinn. Thanks, guys.